that last response reminds me, it echoes a bit of the situation with Natalie Greenfield, because I heard you say, when you sort of went back to everything a few years ago, kind of gave a new, updated take on everything. You had said, were there things we could have done better?
Mm-hmm.
Were there things that maybe we should have done better? Yes. Are you going to sleep well, regardless, knowing you had done what you thought? Yes, you will sleep well.
Right.
It sounds a lot like that.
Mm-hmm.
But with the Natalie Greenfield case, as someone that now lives in this community, there's something different about that situation.
Yes, that was a different one.
And I it's hard for me to put my finger on, because I think what people have a hard time understanding is that, for the most part, I know they've moved a couple of times, but everyone still lives in this community together.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone thinks there's Natalie Greenfield and there's Douglas Wilson.
Right.
But I've walked down Main Street and seen you walk past Natalie.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you guys see each other.
Yeah.
And family members are intertwined, and friends, and
right.
But in a weird way, that one seems more sad, actually.
Yes.
And why does that one just seem sad? I mean, I think it's absolutely horrible, the situation.
Right.
Based on, and I've tried to read as much as I could on it, or what's available, and stuff she's written and what people have written about it, what you've said. I think it's a really sad situation. You're the pastor at the time that's over it, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're members. Are they members of Christ Church? The Greenfields at this time? Or yeah. And so you're the pastor. You're in charge. Why does this one why does that situation actually in an odd way seem more sad?
It's because I think you're right. It is a lot more sad. And that's because the crater is bigger and the debris field is larger with that one. Okay. In the earlier one with Stephen Sittler and his victims, the kids were, here are some of the differences. When Stephen first started molesting kids, he was 13. Okay. And younger than Natalie was when she was molested.
Right.
Okay. So that's the first thing. So he was still a kid himself, and he got into this pattern, and through the next 5-6 years, whatever, he was involved in molesting a number of kids. Stephen was caught, repented, is walking with the Lord, is living a stable life. His victims, because there were a number of them, and I don't know the stories of all of them, but that's got to be a bad. It's a bad element. It's a bad, awful thing that happens to you when you're a little kid. But it was the sort of thing where I don't know of the demolition of any of the victims' lives. Okay.
Sure.
It may be.
It could be.
It could be, but
because you're not in that narrative. You're not in that trajectory.
Right. But with Natalie, she was wronged in an egregious way, and it's just upended her life. Her life is in a shambles, and I would say a lot of it goes back to that, if not all of it.
Okay.
Right. And so the perpetrator, in that case, Jamin, is not living out. He's I see him occasionally, right. But it's not a. And he's had a tough, a tough go, but it's not like everything disintegrated.
Okay, right.
Yeah, sure. He had another failed marriage and a problem. It was right. So there's lots of sad story to go around, but Natalie's case, I think it wrecked a promising life. She had a lot of promise ahead of her, and it's just
because it seems more, again, I get this sense of, which is really interesting. Again, it's one side of the story, but so many people I've spoken to about the situation seem to have a lot of love and affection for her.
Mm-hmm.
But feel deep.
Right.
It's not this screw her, F her. It's not. I've personally,
right.
And I've interacted with plenty of people that have been maybe on the opposite side of her response toward. But I've never encountered that within. I mean, maybe people have to her. I don't know, but I think.
Right. So, in broad outlines, let me state what that scenario was. Her folks ran a boarding house, and they brought Jamin into their boarding house as a boarder in order to conduct a secret courtship of their daughter.
Has anyone denied that?
Well, Natalie's denied it, and during the heyday when this was a public controversy, Natalie denied it, and other people denied it. But I have a letter from Gary to her father, Natalie's father, acknowledging that was the case.
But is that like a smoking gun, or is that like that's not the way you see it? You're just saying, look.
I'm saying you can't have it both ways. Okay. So if a predator molests a 3-year-old girl, okay, you've got a stark perpetrator and victim scenario. There's no ambiguity about it, okay, which is different than, and this is not Natalie's situation, but just to go the other end of the spectrum, different than a 19-year-old guy in a relationship with a girl who's 3 weeks shy of her 18th birthday. Okay. Okay. So, or a 25-year-old guy who's dealing with someone who's underage. So, you can have a consensual relationship with someone who's jailbait, and that's at one end, right? And then you've got the other end of molesting tots that is open and shut. This is awful. Now, when her parents brought Natalie in to the boarding house to conduct this, the parents were saying
when they brought Jamin in.
When they brought Jamin in to the house, they were saying our daughter is old enough and mature enough and wise enough to be in a relationship.
At what age?
She was, I think, 14, right around there, 14. And she's 14, he's 23. So her parents think...
But this is where you get in trouble, because it's kind of here where you, I think the way people take it, kind of have the gall to describe Natalie as a woman. And people do not like you describing reality.
Right. And what I'm doing is I'm pointing out her parents were describing her as a woman.
So you're not saying that, in your opinion, from your perspective, she's this tall, very womanly looking 14-year-old that looks 18 and knows it.
Right. So I'm saying that if, from my perspective,
does that sound bad when I say that to you?
No, because I'm not out to get you. But if I were out to get you, I could manufacture materials out of what you just said to get you. But if I'm looking at a 14-year-old Natalie, and someone says, "Is she ready for marriage?" I would say, let's give it 8 years or so.
For real. So you're saying when you're looking at Natalie at 14, and you saw her, she's in your church, and if someone came to you and said, "Is Natalie ready For a courtship or for, what about just a courtship?
Yeah.
What would you have said?
No, absolutely not. So what I'm saying is that you can't flip a switch and have it both ways. So when her parents brought Jamin in for this secret courtship, and I think it was secret because they knew the Christian community would go, "What the heck are you doing?" Right? So she's not ready for that. So they bring him in for a secret courtship. That courtship, so it's in a boarding house. The relationship was being conducted. It got out of hand.
But in fairness, does anyone think that, and again, this is, now we're in an area that I don't know, but do you believe that the assumption was a courtship and a sexual courtship, or a courtship that would lead eventually to what we would say is a biblical approach to marriage?
The parents were not advocating or aware of the sexual element. Okay. But they were aware of the romantic element, the attention. They were aware of that.
Right.
And they were saying, our daughter is old enough and mature enough for that. They were radically mistaken on that. She wasn't. And they left her vulnerable and exposed.
How is this your fault?
This is a question that has occurred to me more than once. So
we could describe this in detail all day long. I'm trying to figure out how this is your fault.
So what happened was, all that he was brought into the house. They had their relationship, and it went south. They broke up. Jamin moved on. Okay, and then 5 years later.
But Jamin's also a student at this point at New St. Andrews?
No, not New St. Andrews. He was in Greyfriars Hall.
Greyfriars, excuse me.
So Jamin was in our ministerial training program.
Okay.
And
which is just a horrible combo. No, right? From a scandal standpoint?
Oh, yeah.
This is,
ministerial student.
This must be just like for you, like, really?
Yeah.
Like, really, dude?
Really, dude? Right, exactly. So he's a ministerial student, and he looks like a fair-haired boy. He looks like an all-American kid, right?
Good looking,
well-spoken, that sort of thing. And so he's in our Greyfriars program. He gets engaged to another girl 5 years later, 5 years after the breakup. When he gets engaged to this other girl, Natalie comes forward with her story.
So you're telling me from 14, and again, I'm still trying to figure out how this is your fault, from 14 to 19, right? So he gets popped for this at some point.
Right.
This gets brought to you as the pastor.
Right.
And you say what?
So what happened was when the whole thing erupted, when Natalie came forward 5 years later.
Because this seems to be the legal, I guess what I'm seeing here is that this where it gets kind of, there's a legal issue here.
Right.
Right? She's 14. Mm-hmm. You find out about this, she's how old?
19.
Wait, you don't find out about this until she's 19?
No, I don't, no.
Wait.
So I find out about it when everybody else does, 5 years later.
That's a fact.
Yeah. So then what happened?
That's crazy because even I think that he gets popped and you know about it.
No.
And you defend him because, look, Natalie's tall enough and pretty enough and mature enough and there was this courtship and the parents, and even if you're not for the courtship per se, look, this is,
Not what happened. So what happened was the whole thing went south. Jamin gets engaged to another girl 5 years later. Natalie comes forward.
Is Natalie in the church this entire time?
Yeah. Natalie comes forward. She's in the church. She comes forward and tells the story, and the world finds out what happened with Jamin. Of course, at that point, we take action with regard to his Greyfriars status and all of these things. And Gary, Natalie's father, is understandably hot. He's
at who?
At Jamin.
He doesn't know?
No, he found out when everybody else did. So Natalie, the extent of Natalie and Jamin's relationship was a secret between the two of them for those 5 years. When she comes forward, her dad finds out, her mom finds out, the church finds out, the authorities find out, everything. Okay, so Gary is hot at Jamin for what he did. And that part is understandable, right? And so Gary is going to sue, take it to the courts. Our concern there was with the fact of the secret courtship now comes. So
because this is sticky now. This is where it gets. This is where we're really in the weeds now on, again, church, government, human behavior, sin, responsibility. Right. This. I mean, best of luck to the average church down the street handling this. But I'm curious then what became okay.
Okay. So what happened was our elders were pretty distraught over how Gary had failed to protect his daughter in this whole thing.
Okay.
The secret courtship, and we were distraught. And he was on the warpath going after Jamin and was going to take the whole thing to court. We're going to press charges and the whole thing. We knew enough by that time when everything had erupted, but we find all the stuff we know in the immediate aftermath of it coming out. We know from everything that erupted at that point that if Jamin if they pressed charges and took Jamin to court, Jamin's defense would be, this is entirely consensual. She was really into it. She kept journals to testify to the fact, and here that he had copies of those journals. And we knew that if Gary prosecuted Jamin in the courts, that Natalie would go through a meat grinder again. Okay, so we told Gary, you have every right to pursue this, but basically do a better job protecting your daughter while you're doing this.
So before we touch on that, but at that point, is Natalie upset at you?
No, that came later.
Why do you think that came later?
Because a few years after that, her mom was concerned about another relationship that wanted me to speak to her about, which I did. Okay. And she, at that point, didn't want pastoral exhortations to live in a Christian way. Okay. Right. So, but her being upset with me came later. Okay. In this whole thing, that was not the situation. Now, the one thing where you alluded to earlier, where I said we could have done a better job than that. When after it erupted, her dad was upset, I think, at our rebuke of him for failing to protect his daughter. And you have to understand that in the years preceding this, it was the Greenfields were sort of the stellar homeschooling family. Right, yeah. They were really a hub. Yeah. Their home was a hub for
smart kids,
a lot of people. Yeah. And, high performance family. Yeah. And
super entrepreneurial and
yeah. And so this was sort of a major humiliation, and Gary started to fall apart as a result of this. Pat and Gary wound up divorced as a result, and it was just the whole thing was a sad and tragic meltdown, right?
But when did they start blaming you?
Well, I think Gary started blaming me early on, and the thing I should have done better is we should have insisted that Natalie get the kind of counseling that a girl in that situation needed. But by that point, her dad was upset with us and sort of was running interference, keeping us away from her. And we should have done a better job overcoming Dad's opposition and resistance and reluctance to get her the pastoral help she needed. So had we done a better job in breaking through those pride defenses when the whole thing maybe a lot of this wouldn't have happened. But it's just a sad story for Natalie, and it's been Jamin's life after this whole thing wasn't blessed either. He's sort of
it's been hard. It's been And again, I don't think what people maybe understand is we all live in this community.
Right.
People could leave.
Right.
I mean, Natalie's gone back and forth, but I mean, you see her and I do events, sporting events, bootsers, whatever, you know, Jamin, kids, school, all that. I mean, it's still fascinating to me in these two situations. People could just leave.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's something I want to say here. I need to say it at some point. And it's one of these things that I want to say it, and I've got something very important that I mean by it, but it can be taken out of context and turned upside down. All right? And that is when someone says, well, see, you're covering up. You know, as a pastor, you're covering up. And I would say, look, I'm a pastor. I cover things up for a living. That's what I do. This is, again, a small town. If you got the Christian community in a big room, I could stand up in front and say, okay, you want me to stop covering up? I'll tell you what, I can start on the left side of the room or the right side of the room, and I'll work my way across and start telling stories. You want,
right?
What do you want me to do?
Right.
Okay. Well, it's really important for people who are going through maybe the worst time of their life that they can talk to somebody that isn't going to go talk to reporters or talk to someone that, that basically, when one of our tasks is you don't want to cover up an ongoing crime, right? So if a wife is getting beat up every other night, or kids are being molested and it's an ongoing thing, and you cover it up, that's a cover up in the negative sense, right? That's a cover up in the negative sense. But I've had families of abuse victims thank me. So I'm in the newspaper. I'm taking a beating, and their situation is not on the front page. Their situation, their names are not involved. Yeah. Their kids not involved, and they thank me because they know that Doug would take a beating to keep us out of it. Right? Because that's what I'm doing. I'm covering up a situation. I'm not covering up an ongoing crime. Right. And I'm not covering up something that needs to go to the cops. But there are all kinds
and you're not letting things go. You're counseling, you're
intervening, addressing.
Stop this behavior.
Yeah.
Right.
And some of the things that you can,
especially behaviors that now are legal, and embraced, and right.
So if certain things, the pastors have to stop it and call the cops. Other situations, the pastors have the authority to just get it stopped. Stop it. Right. The law need not be involved. Some things are not illegal, but they're humiliating and embarrassing, right? So do you want me to tell this? Do you want me to write my memoirs and name names and talk about all the people that I've dealt with, that what ran up to that suicide, and what happened with this porn, the history of porn use, right. And look. People, we live in a broken... Or
confess pedophilia in their mind that they're not acting out on and they're struggling with, or where do you want to go?
Right, where do you want to go? And so I've been a pastor for 40 plus years, and I've pretty much seen it all. I'm always careful about, I don't want to say that too strongly because I don't know what's going to happen next week, but I've seen an awful lot, and it is wretched what people do to their marriages and do to their families and do to their lives and do to their vocations. And my job as a pastor, and our job as elders, is to teach the way of forgiveness, which is the only way out. Right? It's the only way out. If sinners can't be cleansed, then shoot me now, right? Right. So basically, I want the people in Christ Church to know, and in our community to know, is that we are responsible in our pastoral care. So if someone comes in to say, "I've got something I wanted to share with you. Do you promise? Do you promise confidentiality?" I always say no, no, because I don't want them to tell me where the body's buried,
right?
And I feel really bad about it. And thank you for confidentiality. But what I promise them is discretion. I don't promise absolute confidentiality, but I do promise to be discreet with their information. And I'm more than happy to say that I've paid a heavy price for that discretion, right? But there's a lot of people that know.
And that's not a woe is me. You're just saying You're well aware of the shots you've taken.
I'm well aware of it. And a lot of the people that I've been a shield for are well aware of it. Okay, so there are people who, and then when something erupts, despite something erupts, here's an additional complication. Again, not a poor me, but you've got multiple stories going on. You've got this person, you've got a number of bystanders, and I can't tell the story of this person's situation without roping in other bystanders.
Right.
Yeah. Because I've got to be discreet with everybody's story. Now, the reason I'm willing to talk about Stephen's situation is because it erupted. It was public. It was a court case. The reason I'm willing to talk about Natalie's situation is that she made it a public situation. But had she not done that, I would have gone to my grave not talking about it, for her sake primarily, and for the sake of the people surrounding her. And so that's basically, I would say to people, what do you think the pastorate is? You're talking to people who are busted, broken.
I guess I'll end with this on this section, but that's kind of my point too. Is like that's my point. Who do you think you are to even get involved in people's lives in this situation, in these situations? Like I'm really asking that. It's semi-rhetorical, but who do you think you are?
So the way God made the world, imagine there's no pastors. Imagine there's no counselors. And then imagine all the sins that people do. They're going to talk to somebody. Right? Now, what we have done, and I think what God's word encourages us to think is he has done, is he has assigned and entrusted certain individuals with the office of helping do this kind of cleanup, to steward the pastoral snarls and messes. And in order to be able to do that, you have to be trained and equipped and gifted, and your family has to be in order. You can't be exhibiting all the same pathologies yourself.
But you're in Podunk, Idaho. You have no degree. I think you might have a philosophy. You took a class in philosophy.
Yeah, I have a degree in nothing. No, it's worse than that. It's a degree in philosophy.
You have a degree in philosophy, right? So
right.
And you're qualified to handle the most heinous of all crimes.
Right. So there's,
as people say,
I would say, authorized, not qualified. The Apostle Paul, the Apostle Paul, one time when he's talking about the responsibility of preaching the gospel, he says, "And who is sufficient for these things?" Like, if someone walked up to me and said, "Who do you think you are taking on these things?" I'd say, that's a good question, because in every one of these things, every one of these scenarios, I'm in over my head, right? So, because people are not, it's not like mastering a video game or where you learn the tricks and then you can do it, or learning how to write code. People are not as logical as that. It's always messy. It's always oblique. There's always something else going on. And so consequently, you have to go into it saying, I'm authorized by God to be in this situation. So I'm not out of my lane. I'm authorized to be here. But are there elements of this that I don't understand? Absolutely. Which is why you have to trust God to use your words, to give you the wisdom in the moment, to say. But if you walk in saying, I got this, just watch me go, then no.
This is Darren Doane, and thank you for listening to All My Friends Are Heretics.